What's next for IT? In today's economy, technology touches every aspect of the day-to-day operations of business. There has never been more pressure on IT to deliver for our organizations. So what can we expect over the next decade? We need to think differently about how we approach our work to continue to thrive into the future. This requires all of us to be intentional in how we look at our role going forward. Smart IT is an approach to getting the important things done by transforming the way we think, work, and lead. And now, let's disrupt the status quo, simplify the complex, and reduce risk the smart IT way. I want to welcome everybody to another episode of the Smart IT Podcast. Today, I'm hanging out with Pam and Bob. And today, we're going to talk about asset management. Very, very cool topic, I think. So welcome to the show, guys.
Oh, thanks for having us.
Yeah.
All right. It's almost like we were just hanging out talking yesterday.
I know. It feels like it's been hours.
Yes. Well, this is a very, very important topic. So in the Smart IT, we're talking about what's coming up next in the next decade for IT. So if you look at IT leadership, CIOs, CTOs, they're looking to make sure they prep for everything that's going on, digital transformation, AI, being agile for the business. But they still have this persistent challenge for over the last couple of decades, right? They seem to be struggling with asset management. So a lot of my organizations that I encountered still using a lot of manual processes, a lot of, I would call it basic tools to keep track of everything that the company buys, all the technology that's in use. And with this complex infrastructure that's driving and supporting business initiatives, I think it's time that we should look in the future and figure out, what's good asset management looks like.
Sure.
So let me first start off by getting you guys' perspective with you guys and your roles. You go out, you talk to a lot of people, and I know you hear some common challenges, a lot of problems and heartburn. So let's start there. What are you guys hearing out there in the field around asset management?
Bob, I'll let you jump in first. Nope, you go first.
All right, me go first. All right.
Yep.
So, hi everyone. I'm Bob. I'm field CTO at Device 42. It's a really interesting topic. First of all, shout out to Excel. You've done a great job over the last greater part of a decade trying to be a CMDB. It's something we've talked about for decades and something we will continue to talk about for decades, which is the idea of asset management. And that's because regardless of what role you are in a company, regardless of kind of what vertical you align to, having a good understanding of your assets is basically IT decision support, right? How do you know how I can spend money on buying new stuff if I don't know what I have? How do I protect or reduce my risk profile if I don't know what I have or who has access to it? How do I understand and remove roadblocks from agility, from a transformation? How do I de-risk a digital migration or something like that if I don't understand what I have and how I'm using it? So I think in a lot of industries, they've thought it's good enough to have what I would call an asset catalog. So I have this list of items. Cool, but I don't really know what workflows they're supporting. I don't really understand who they're mapping to. I don't really have a good feeling about the authenticity of it, how up to date it is. If you have a guy walking around with a clipboard doing laps around your data center, by the time he's back to the starting line, someone's reprovisioned an IP, somebody's updated an OS, it's no longer valid. So we see it in every single decision-making kind of silo. We see it in every kind of industry. It's certainly huge when you're talking audit or compliance. So if you're talking a regulated environment, think banking or financial, think public sector, think SLED, anything like that, you really need to understand what you have and how you're using it. But that's kind of what I'm seeing out in that field. Pam, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, the same, obviously. I mean, most companies really don't have a grasp on what they have. And they're making decisions or trying to make decisions, with the budget they have. And it almost like asset management goes to the back burner, but it really is the foundation. And that is, I don't think a lot of companies realize how much it can help. And like Rob said, and Bob said, not Rob, Rob's didn't make
I'll
it.
take
today.
Rob. I'll take any.
Close, it works.
What did I call
Bobby,
you?
Rob, Robert, Hart.
That guy. So
Ginger.
yeah, I think I think people miss the point of how important it really is, because it is really the foundation, whether it's security, whether it's finance, whether it's budget, and different people have different priorities within companies, but asset management really does affect everybody in some capacity, I think.
Well, it's interesting you guys use a couple words I love around decision support.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's one of the critical things in the smart IT framework that I put together. Because I think a lot of times people are kind of siloing the conversation for asset management to this real specific technical task, a little to-do task for maybe somebody over in the corner to do it part-time, right? And then when you talk about decisions that are being made all the time, right? The tactical, the operational, the strategic decisions the IT leaders have to deal with every day, right? Those have effect on those decisions that are being made right now, right?
Absolutely.
So I know yesterday we actually talked about the whole thing of asking a company, hey, how many workstations do you have, or a particular OS type? And the fact that produces we're not exactly sure, we have the estimate, let me get back to you. So just something as simple as, how many did you buy? How many did you spend out? I would think would be signaling to CIOs that, you know what, maybe we need to put some more attention to this, because you want to really test the maturity of your entire program around provisioning, designing, securing this infrastructure, that you should say, you know what, this is a bread and butter core functionality IT. Let's go tackle it. So Pam or Bob, either one. So when you go out and talking to people and they say, hey, it sounds like a good idea, what are the common challenges that they say? Well, we would like to mature the asset management program, but what is that but that you hear a lot?
It's not a priority right now. We'd love to do it. Um, uh, Sometimes we're not talking to the right person who it really is affecting. It's not their job, or they might be afraid it's going to affect their job. Those are probably the top two that I hear. Bob, what are you hearing?
The big one is cost, typically more than anything. They see a good CMDB or something that's going to allow them to do asset management as a lot more costly than Excel, right?
Yeah.
And you could make the same argument that a car is much more expensive than a pair of sneakers, but one's a heck of a lot more useful.
Yeah.
And so I think people are being kind of, penny wise and dollar dumb when it comes to the cost of a CMDB, because I would argue that you can get a return of investment almost immediately when it comes to this, whether it's reducing your risk profile, it's avoiding fines and audits, it's right sizing your software license arrangement, it's optimizing and replacing either unused you might have like these you bought these servers a few years ago, nobody's using them. So instead of buying a new server when someone asks for a new asset, you could actually just move that workload onto the new one. You have immediate found money. So I think people are really overlooking the value of a CMDB. To me, it's a very easy conversation. I don't even go to the grocery store without looking in my fridge to see what I have first. So this should be a really easy concept to understand, but people aren't getting it.
Yeah, they see it as a nice to have. And what they're
Yeah.
not seeing is the benefits, like Bob's talking about. You really have to know, okay, what am I going to do with this? It's not just giving you the visibility into your assets. It's where you can save money, where you can consolidate, where you can cut down time and preparing for audits. There's so many benefits. But if people don't look at that for some reason, they're just thinking, oh, it's nice to have, but not right now. And then they keep
It's
spending
really
money on
not, though.
everything
It's
else.
fundamental.
Yeah, and they're paying all this, they're paying for power and they're paying for storage and for cloud when they're not even utilizing all of it or not utilizing it properly.
Yeah. If you have a co-location, and I could show you how you could free up just one footprint in that co-location, how much does that save?
Right.
Enough to buy a lot of Excel licenses.
Yes.
I'll give you that.
And the online training classes for those. You gotta learn how
Yes,
to use those pivot
exactly.
tables.
Yeah.
Pivot.
Well, this is very interesting because as this conversation is going on, we talked a lot about the dollars and cents, right?
Yeah.
Which chief financial officers love to talk about. So this would be seen to be a natural fit for a CIO and a CISO, right? To go talk to their CFO, take him or her out to lunch, and have a discussion about saving money, optimizing finite resources. So I'm trying to figure out them. I think maybe CIOs thinks their plates are too full and they'll get to it maybe later. So obviously we see some industry regulations and frameworks
Yep.
that call it out. Hey, no, inventory your hardware, inventory your software, right? So we just kind of been alluding to hardware, but the software, right? Which software are you running? So see, so next time you hear that breach notification on the news, hey, are we using that particular software in that particular version?
Remember Log4j?
Yeah. The fact
Yeah.
that you can't go in and log in and query and in a few minutes or less, get back an answer seemed to be a problem, right? There seems to be a lot of friction in that. So let's talk about this friction here, right? Just answer the question, are we exposed? Do we actually run it in our environment?
Yeah, and I'll take this one first. I mean, you mentioned, CISO, CIO, CFO. You give me any C-level position, and I can tell you why they care about asset management. I mean, even the CEO, they care about a competitive advantage. They need to be able to be agile and be able to adapt. They need to avoid headlines for the wrong reason, like a breach, because they didn't take care of a known bad configuration that would have been very easy to report on. So there's a lot of reasons why that's important. But just the one that you gave right now, we have lots of situations where it's very valuable to, within a reasonable time frame, let's say under 3 months, be able to find out what I have for OSs, what I have for devices, what I have that has this version of Windows that's going into support end of life. That way I can make sure I'm not put at undue risk. Log4j happened, I think, like 2 years ago. How can I immediately find out all my services running with Log4j and be able to address it? If I have a day zero vulnerability, day zero is about as long as I want that vulnerability in my environment, because hackers and nefarious actors are going to try and take advantage of it as quick as possible. So how can I quickly query my environment to find out everything that doesn't have a KB installed yet so that I can update and close that vulnerability? That's the value of a CMDB, especially one that goes beyond assets and goes into things like discovering services, discovering OSs, discovering software binaries, discovering dependencies. How do I take that Windows machine and tie it to my billing application, tie it back to my CFO? And now I've also increased kind of the shareholder who's interested in this information. I think it's an incredibly important thing that's often overlooked. And I will tell you, I wear my security hat more than any other hat, because I think that there's nothing that kills a company quicker than a security breach. I think you lose credibility, you lose customers, you lose a lot of stuff that's hard to get back. That's more than time and money. So I tend to care a lot more about time to reaction, time to closing up known holes. How can I bubble up bad configurations organically so that I can have issue avoidance instead of issue response? So that kind of thing is where I see a lot of value in it.
Yeah, and I've heard a lot of companies, they're just people downloading software left and right? And they don't have visibility to that, right? So there's software there's multiple tools or software being downloaded, and like that is making them super vulnerable. And it's just something that just, software is a huge one. That's what we hear the most is people need that software management.
And like you said, it ties right back to cost, right? So if you don't know what software is installed, what's being used, you could be buying too many licenses for, like Bob, your favorite example of Excel licensing, right?
Yep.
You may be licensed for 10,000, but only use 1,000, right?
Yeah.
So if you don't really know what's installed and what's being used, so the question is, how are some of the internal conversations occurring there, right? Because is it service desk coming back and saying, hey, we need to have somebody go and service our color laser printers? Well, hey, how many color laser printers do we have? And by which vendor? Where are they located and who are the owners? A simple question like that could be a great use case to query a system that has that information. The same as a security analyst who's saying, hey, is this vulnerability I just heard about for Java version 4.x? Is that in my environment?
Yeah.
The same as somebody running a data center, like how many systems in this port are currently plugged in or active? Do I need more capacity? So if you start to look at all the different IT roles, you can easily see the need for everybody to be able to query a central location to ask and answer questions very quickly. So the fact that we don't have them in many cases got you wondering how much manual task and friction every day is occurring from service desk to SOC to developers, and even IT leaders trying to answer simple questions. What do we got? Where is it? And who owns it?
Well, like if you have Microsoft coming to an audit and they say, hey, you're utilizing X amount, how do you prove that you aren't? I mean, we've helped customers save hundreds of thousands of dollars because, and this is Microsoft's an example, right? But they'll say, well, you're utilizing this many or using this many licenses, and they have no way to prove if they are or they're not. And that's a vulnerable position to be in because they can't prove otherwise. And we can help save money just by being able to show actually how many licenses they're using.
Yes,
Yeah, you brought up a smart point there too. I think some of what we see too is a symptom of a bigger problem.
Yeah.
Right? You have compartmentalized environments, you have all these silos, and so people might not realize that there's even the ability to look at the whole picture. They might not see the forest through the trees. So they might not realize, oh, you actually could take a look at all your printers. So they just might not even realize that that's an available solution.
Yeah.
One that's come up a lot in the field, and I won't pick on anyone in particular. I think all companies are great and offer some value. But there was recently a small disruptance with Broadcom purchasing VMware. They made some changes to licensing, and that ruffled some industries, right? How are they going to adapt to that change in licensing in a way that's not super disruptive to their company? And with VMware playing such a pivotal role within their overall solution stack, it's typically what runs all your application stacks, things like that. It tends to be what you lean on to scale things up or down. It's a wonderful technology, but how do I see how pervasive and prevalent that is in my environment? How do I see what's being over and underutilized? What could I move or shift or downsize or right size if I don't understand what those underlying dependencies are? Who's using them? What are they being used for? That kind of thing. How do you react to market changes if you don't understand what you have and how it's being used and how it's even being utilized correctly, right? If nothing's going above 10% CPU utilization, is it even being used?
Yeah.
Right. And that's a fair question too.
And the other thing is the what people plugging in things, rogue devices into the network. You're like, what is this? Maybe it's only being caught because he ran a vulnerability scanner, right?
Like
So,
a bring your own device, but it's more like bring your own drama.
yeah, it's like who connected this to the Wi-Fi and who jacked this into this outlet that's in the coffee break room, right?
Yep.
Uh, so you mentioned earlier about the silos, right? So we could have a networking team doing
Yeah.
inventory on routers and switches and load balancers. We could have a team, the desktop team doing maybe Windows or OS level inventory. We could have a cloud team thinking about how many containers am I running. We can keep going on and on. You can get multiple silos trying to track their own things. And that's a good point. Does every team know that you can actually centralize this, right? They heard asset management, CMDB. Maybe just assume it's too hard. This is the best we can do. But the ability to quickly actually query, I mean, it's pretty powerful. Almost seem almost really basic, right? That in 2024, in the age of AI, we're not struggling to figure out and answer that most basic question.
I mean, and that's a really good point too, because there are some times where you don't want that, right? Maybe I don't want my storage team to see all my network devices, or I don't want them to see endpoints. I only want them to see storage. So some of the good CMDB solutions out there Device 42 is among them, will have kind of that next gen CMDB attitude where I know at least device 42 allows RBAC even at the object level. That's a role-based access control. So we could set up devices that are being discovered under a storage scan to be tagged with an object type so that storage can see them where storage might not be able to see end user compute. And that way you can have that centralized solution that gives you all that value of aggregate reporting, but doesn't compromise that desired silo kind of activity where maybe I want you for security reasons or least privilege access. I only want you to see your department stuff. You could still have IT see everything. You could have storage only see storage. There's ways that you can do that to best serve the company in a way that's not breaking least privilege, for instance.
Yeah, that's a good point to make, right? So the governance structure, the CIOs should be playing around, right? So
Yeah.
we have these capabilities similar to like collecting data, right, in logs or a data lake, right? Where we
Yep.
collect a lot, where we have role-based access, we have policies and process around who can see what, how we back it up, how we protect it. Which should be, once again, centralized capabilities of most IT teams. So let's dig in a little bit more because you mentioned a couple of times about like what's running on top of something or what business function. So I think most people are thinking CMDBs, okay, here are my printers and my access points and my containers. Okay, what is that? What does the business run off of that? What is it dependent on it? By upgrade or knock something offline, a load balance it? What does that mean from the business standpoint? So let's talk about not only just identifying the asset, the physical assets, but identifying what runs on top of it and what does that connect to from a business standpoint.
Yeah, Pam, do you want a chance to talk before I steamroll?
Oh no, this is all your area. You go for it.
So yeah, that's huge, right? And when we talk about like printers and we talk about small little assets like that, that's one of those things where the security side of me, the cost side of me kind of dozes off because that's low value stuff as far as I'm concerned. And I'm not being dismissive of anyone or any workflow, but I tend to think more about the business value, right? If I lose my applications and I can no longer serve my customers, that's an immediate and life-threatening risk to my company. Having a printer down doesn't pose that same risk. So understanding not just the assets, but where do those workflows lie? How does that tie into the connective tissue that runs my business? And ultimately, that will probably tie into your C-suite, right? That's going to get the attention of a CTO, a CIO, a CFO, a CISO, a CEO. You could even have like a people's officer care because if my people are no longer being productive, that's an impact that could lower their own job satisfaction. They could start looking elsewhere. Workflows really tie into the business in every way possible. So understanding that impact chart, the impact lists, service dependencies, which applications are running on devices, network dependencies. If I take this switch down, what workflows does that take down? That's absolutely critical. And I know that I get excited about that kind of thing, but that's the kind of stuff that can put a company down or disabled. And that's really important. A printer being out of ink, that's important too, but it's not the same important.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. So right next to the printer port, somebody plugs in another device. And then a year later, somebody says, what is this device? Oh, it's something that controls something on the floor of a factory. So what is it doing? It's controlling that robot over there. What do you mean it's controlling the robot? Well, it has a TCP/IP stack, has a connectivity that goes to a cloud third provider, and it's helping to control the assembly line. So now we're getting into these other things, which are controlling maybe 100 other devices on the floor, right? So now we merge from standard enterprise corporate local area networks. We talked about WANs before, and people are thinking, okay, that's a big deal. And then regular workstations or servers. But now we get into things that are controlling other machines. And so you got the whole big thing with OT and a lot of tools, right? Can't see what's in the OT side of the house. But from a business standpoint, they bought it. So let's talk about, hey, if I switch locations, and move workload to the cloud or OT environment, it's still an asset we need to know about and to manage. So let's talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, we see that a lot on the manufacturing side, right? You'll have a manufacturer, they want to open up a new location, but they might not know how to replicate that. You also see it on the business front when you're talking DR and or disaster recovery and business continuity kind of strategies. If I need to be able to mirror this location to another location, I need to understand even that kind of command and control infrastructure. If I have something that's giving out work orders, if I have OT, if I have medical devices, if I have IoT, anything like that, how do I make sure that that gets represented? That's not always easy to discover for a lot of technologies. A lot of technologies either rely on a SaaS offering, in which case I need to make sure that ports are open so I can scan, and perhaps I don't have ports open to find the OT devices. Or it might be an agent technology. I need to install an agent. Good luck installing an agent on your IoT. It's not going to happen. There's no S to install it on. So from that perspective, it can be hard to grab visibility into that. So a lot of good discovery technologies will use multiple protocols, multiple scanning technologies. Maybe you're doing SNMP, you're doing TCP port scans, you're doing Redfish, you're doing name it. And that way you try and get as many different views into the environment as possible. And that way you can look for gaps, you can stitch different views together. I bring that up because that's what Device 42 does, and I always try and low key promote Device 42. But there's plenty of good discovery technologies, and that's what the best ones do. It's that multiple views to try and grab that information. It's very important. Now I'll throw in an anecdote.
Yeah.
Because what we see often is exactly that. It's somebody put in kind of a MacGyver fix to something. They winged it, and then they moved. They went on to a different company, and with that went the reason why that machine was there. We had a partner that was going through an environment.
Mhm.
They found this old machine. It was using an old employee's login as the service login. So they were going to decom it. They were going to decommission it and take it out of the environment. And someone's like, wait, it could be here for a reason. And they had to look and look and look. And finally, they saw this communication call back to this other data center. And it was actually controlling the O2 system for a data center. But it was just a random box in a corner. And that's why it's important to understand kind of all these dependencies, because, maybe it's the oxygen you breathe. Like it's kind of important, even though it's a random guy's login. So, yeah.
Well, it's
Always
funny.
try and pull at that thread.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, because I have had situations in the past where somebody said, "What's on this port I can unplug?" It's this little server. Well, it's actually the physical badge reader for the building.
Exactly.
So you can't open the doors and close the doors, right? And then the port next
If
to
you're
it
at
is,
work, stay at work. Problem solved.
yeah. Or it could be voicemail server, right? It could be call management. It
Yep.
could be a physical video surveillance that's recording outside that the security guard at the gate is using. So
Full CMDB is very important. I think
Yeah.
that's the message we're trying to say is please get a real CMDB
Yeah.
and not an Excel sheet, because it's important to understand.
Very critical. I think something happened where we thought like something's important and something not important, but IT is not just like playing around with stuff. We plugged it in for a reason.
Right.
And I think it was easier when it's a physical switch, but then we start to virtualize things. And guess what? Call management, video surveillance, badge reader, I now have virtual NICs. So when we move that to a different environment, then with some visibility got lost. So I think it's kind of important to make sure we realize this is an asset management is a program. So even if you can't do SMP in an OT environment, it turns out somebody actually expended money to buy it. Somebody came to your site, installed it. Somebody observed them installing it. And maybe the culture around the company is like, what is that? Okay, I'm gonna send in a request to help desk, let them know they plug something in to this environment. Maybe it's a physical port, or maybe it's a third party or something in some AWS. And we'll record it in the central location. And we can mark it as we don't have a technology capable of detecting it, but we have people who are aware that it was installed.
Yeah.
So back to people process, we have a process to identify things we plug in and spin out. So we're aware of it. It's like the old credit card with the developer spinning up the VMs and the AWS or Azure, they were quite aware that they spun it out. It just means that no one else was aware of it because they did it somewhere else. So when we talk about asset management, it is a program. It is using the people, the process, and technology, and that we can have a process that when we see something get plugged or enabled, that we can actually identify it somewhere other than Excel.
Yeah. Yeah, we had a customer come talk to us and tell us about when they went down one time and they, have an ITSM tool in place, and if they didn't have device 42, again, another plug for us, but they wouldn't have even known where it was. They would have been scrambling. It's over the weekend. They're trying to figure out where it was. And it was somebody had unplugged a server in a room that they probably would have spent days being down. And who knows if they would have been able to recuperate from that. So it's an important part of the DR, discovery, disaster recovery as well. It's just, there's just so many different things that it affects. And knowing where everything, what's connected to what, is a little bit important part of that.
That's actually a great example too of that impact chart, right? Because if I see that 4 servers went down, and I can see that those are the 4 host OSs or the client OSs on this physical host, that should equip me to be able to quicker resolve that issue. Because I should be able to see, oh, there's probably an issue with that physical host because I lost its 4 client machines. And by understanding that impact relationship, that should help your agents be able to get to a quicker mean time to resolution.
The other interesting thing is the old DR and BCP, right?
Yep.
In the old days, somebody processed it. How do we bring up another data center?
Poorly is the answer.
So between that whole efforts over there and then the whole efforts of like networking teams to keep track of documentation, right? Which is supposed to like map out these dependencies that you've been talking about. I think the process people just got overwhelmed, right? You just told me that this business application has what, 5 databases across 3 data centers, 2 different cloud providers, and API calls to 10 different other third parties. And this application requires load balancers and firewalls and IPS. And at that point, the process people say, we have no idea what that is. IT technology has to tell me what those are. But if you ask the CIO, it could mean 40, 50, 60 different instances of assets, right? Across the board. So at that point, it's like, we're talking about technology and tooling requirements to track those dependencies that you've been talking about. So I think when we talk about CIOs, and this is 2024, if they don't have in their budget right now that they're going to buy some type of tooling to enhance the process, I really think they're kind of doing themselves a disservice here. So let's talk about, like, how would you, after having a conversation with a potential client, coming away thinking, you know what, they're serious about this, they're ready to roll here. I mean, obviously, I say we're going to budget for X, Y, and Z, but let's talk about moving to that next step of let's doing something about it.
I think you just got to ask questions. You got to be an advisor, right? You have to ask them, what is your DR plan? How do you prepare for an audit? Asking them the questions and having them think about it, and then talking about the repercussions of that and how they're doing it. I think you've really got to have those conversations, and you're not going to, if you don't ask, they're not going to bring it up. They're not going to tell you, that they can't see something, or that they're paying too much for cloud, because they don't know. But if you ask those questions, how do you know what software you have in your environment? Just simple questions, and just sit back and let them answer it. I think that opens so many doors.
Well, I ran into an organization who solved their asset management problem years ago. They basically wrote a check and hired 2 full-time personnel, and that's all they did was asset management. I was trying to figure out what's the magic sauce here. Most organizations struggle if you said, dude, we found it was important, and we hired 2 people, and that's all they do. They're not doing it part-time. So I think at some point, you say if you present a problem and a persistent challenge, you should see the fix or the response to it somewhere in the budget, right? Where somebody said we're going to expend money. If it's 2 or 3 new people, if it's a third party, if it's a managed service, if it's tooling, that should be expressed somewhere upcoming in the budget. So it's like, okay, now we're serious about it. I'm worried that we're going to hit 2025 once again in the age of AI, and we're still going to be talking about, we're still struggling to find out, my God, is that version of code in my environment. I'm not sure. Let's go manually go track that down.
And unfortunately, part of the answer is people are not always going to say they need it. People are not always going to know they need it. Sometimes the easiest way to sell fire insurance is finding people whose homes have burned down. So it's people that have been hurt by this that realize they need that remedy and that this is a valid solution and something they should have been doing to begin with. Going back to your conversation about DR and BC, one of the big problems there is that people make this more complex than it needs to be. If you really boil it down, why are people doing disaster recovery? It's not because they want to make sure that network switch is up and running in that other location. Nobody cares about your network switch. They care about the function of the network switch and what it allows you to do, but they don't care that that network switch is in this alternate location. In a real disaster, people care about keeping the lights on, right? What are the 5 main workflows that need to be up first in order for us to keep our business functioning as usual? And so when you hand someone an entire data center and say, make sure that this is all mapped and can fail over and everything, you're kind of missing the whole point of your own disaster recovery. You really want to make sure that you can still maintain customers, that you can still maintain business as usual. And so understanding the workflows and making sure that the workflows can fail over is the actual goal there. And so if you don't have a configuration database, you're going to miss the mark on that. You're going to be trying to spin your wheels, bringing network switches up and not get billing up.
Yeah.
And billing is what you actually need to get up. So you might only need 20% of that actually in that disaster recovery to keep the lights on. Make it easier. You will be more successful in your actual DR testing if you're not trying to boil the ocean. So that's my advice to people trying to boil the ocean. Don't try and boil the ocean.
I loved it. By the way, have anyone ever thought about that analogy with the boiling the ocean? I wonder how big the flame would have to be to actually boil it.
Pretty big.
Pretty big flame.
Yeah.
Basically what I look like when I'm outside for 20 minutes at noon, that level of
Loved it.
fire.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you start to think about just the interdependence on, private, non-private, play, make war, entertain, any aspects of human lifestyle in a global market, right? We're talking about a level of dependence on technology we haven't seen before, right?
Oh yeah.
So
It's
in the
great.
old days, it's like, yeah, the Wi-Fi is good enough, no big deal.
That was
I just got to check
technology.
email.
Yeah. Because if you look at IT, and every IT process has one simple thing. It's going to spit out something that requires an email notification going out, no matter how advanced it is. So email is quite important, right? It's not a nice to have, it's very important. Latency, very important, right? Having enough capacity. Otherwise, your IPTV might sputter out for your streaming service, right?
Well,
So
you care about latency and bandwidth now, because if I can't move, if my bus isn't big enough and it's not driving fast enough, then I'm not happy.
yeah. And then we want to what? We wanted to wirelessly control potentially vehicles, right?
Yep.
So that bandwidth protection and quality of service, making sure the denial of service, we buffering against denial of service, whereas it used to be, it wasn't as big of a deal. So I think we're getting to the point now where it's more and more things are going to become critical, right? Where we used to classify, okay, this runs the business, but these other 80% of the systems is what the people use to do their work every day. So if you said, oh man, we're going to meet our SLAs, don't worry about application number 10 and 11. Well, what if you have like 500 people relying on that to do their day-to-day job? And while it's down with a 4-hour SLA, they can't do anything else. It's like, whoa, well, that's system critical too. Because not a lot of stuff we're putting out there just not just doing anything, right? People are doing things constantly, credit card transactions, scanning devices, allowing access in and out. There can be less and less of optionality. So I really think this is really the time to really for CIOs and IT leaders to take a stand, right? So like this critical functionality asset management is no longer nice to have. We've been talking about it for quite a while. This is like kind of retiring some of that technical debt, let's get serious about it. Let's make some investments. Let's develop a strategy to really get moving forward here. So if you guys tomorrow, you walk downtown and walk past the corporate office and there's a board of directors meeting going on, they say, "Hey guys, hey Pam, how you doing?" The chairman said, "Come on in here. What are you guys hearing and thinking about? We got an AI strategy going on. We got mergers and acquisitions, but is there anything that we should be concerned about that you guys are talking about?
Yes.
What topic might you guys bring up in those couple of minutes you have to talk to them?"
Ooh. I mean, yeah, it's I mean, you talk about self-driving cars. I mean, that's where you're cutting over from like a luxury to literally life or death. If you have service interruption, all of a sudden you go careening into a tree because you didn't process things quick enough. Somebody died over that. So it's the importance of IT and reliability is more critical than it's ever been, for sure. Your question about jumping into a boardroom, jumping into a C-suite, jumping into anything. You put me in any room, put me in a room with a janitor, and I'll find something you should be concerned about. That's the paranoia in me,
Yeah.
but and it will typically be because you're wasting something, right? You're wasting money, you're wasting time, you're putting yourself in a bad position for the wrong kind of press. There's a lot of things that we need to be concerned about when it comes to IT. People drastically undervalue the cost of downtime. Your comment about a 4-hour SLA. If I just lose the human resources for 4 hours, there's a very clear attachment of salary to that 4 hours. That's easy to calculate. But what about the loss of customer base and confidence? I can tell you every single time one of these like AWS goes down for a few hours or Azure goes down for a few hours or something interrupts Google domain name services, I'm like, I'm going to switch to the other guys. Right? and it only takes a few of those to
Yeah.
really have an actual financial impact. So people need to understand that you need to avoid downtime and interruptions. And if it's by understanding just the connective tissue or what you have, do it. Like that has real value and should have a real return. Whether I'm talking to a C-suite, whether I'm talking to a board, everyone should care about that.
I like it.
Yeah. People wait till it's too late and then
Yep.
that's what
Too
it is.
late.
It's too late. Yeah, exactly.
By definition.
Yeah.
It's okay to say, "Man, I forgot I had that thing in my closet at the house." There's another thing to say, "Oh, darn, I forgot about those 3 containers. We do need that to run this application." Things you never want to hear IT say, right? We didn't.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oops, I forgot I left that S3 bucket open.
By
There
the
goes all
way,
my IP.
yeah, by the way, that did happen like years ago. We were decommissioning some infrastructure for one of the cloud sites, and we just randomly ran a vulnerability scanner and said, "Holy crap, those ports are still open on the firewall. They're still available. We forgot
Whoopsie.
about that." Like, so so if we
I
had
opened them to let my friends in, and then I just
yeah
left the door open.
yeah, so it's like a
Everyone
different
gets to
month.
see the movie.
Come and see it. But when you switch it around and say if we buy it, we'll keep track of it and we'll monitor it and manage it through the life cycle, then that changes the dichotomy. We're not going to scan it and surprised we found it. It's like we know about it because we bought it, we built it, we stood it out, and we'll manage it from that standpoint. So
Yeah.
I think we'll be talking about asset management programs for quite a while here. So is there anything that we haven't talked about yet? For this crowd. So these folks are looking forward to the next 5-10 years and what's next. And are there new career paths or people are there people who can specialize in asset management? Is there a certified asset management consultant architect in the future? Or is it some specialty that someone can take a career path on?
I will tell you, there are some people that are pretty smart. And I always appreciate really smart people. I've seen people that realize that people don't want to do CMDB. They think it's too much work. And so they will offer CMDB as a service. And the reason that that's so smart is because that's a map into your entire environment. I can see all your needs. I can see if you need to buy new hypervisors. I can see if you're running out of storage. I can see if you don't have things mirrored in your DR environment. So that means as a seller of technology, I can find a lot of reasons why we should talk more. So it's a great way to make money selling solutions. It's a great way of making yourself look amazing at a job by closing cost centers, by closing security gaps. It's great for people that are just trying to make their own job more efficient and effective. It's great for a CEO to show all the value they've added to the company since they've been in seat. So there's a lot of ways to embrace that in a way that's going to make your job easier or make you more money. So yeah, I think there's plenty of career opportunities in the concept of CMDB or asset management in general.
Nice.
Yeah, I second that, Bob.
Nice. Anything else for this crowd before we close it out?
No, if you've made it this far, though, I appreciate that you care about your business
Yeah,
enough to listen to us. But this is an important subject. I do really see it as decision support, to the point that I even made my own marketing logo for it. It was a dog with like a service animal vest, and it said like device 42 on it, and it's
Nice.
decision support animal.
I love it.
our mascot.
But yeah, it's huge. It's huge. I don't understand why people wouldn't lean into it, because it really will make everything a lot easier.
And I think that when you're talking to your clients, you've got to make sure you're kind of leading them to the water. You have to help them see why they need it, because otherwise it's going to be a nice to have. Oh yeah, we use Excel spreadsheets. Yeah, this is better. Yeah, we know, but not right now. Like, it's got to go bigger than that. You have to make sure you're talking about the pain points and what will happen, whatever it is. And hopefully you're having enough conversations to where you know a little bit of each of the different use cases that an asset management tool would help. But I think if you're asking the right questions and help and truly being an advisor, you'll show them there's a reason they need it, and where they'll have an ROI. But you got to ask more questions.
Very nice. Well, but we can't close out without answering a very specific question, right? Which kind of gets to the root of your company's name.
Sure.
What's special about 42 in the name here?
Oh man, so there's this wonderful book, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and within that there's this like supercomputer, and you can ask it any question, and unfortunately you got to wait a god awful amount of time in order to get that answer. But they ask this computer, what is the answer to life, the universe, and everything in it? And it just spits out the answer, 42. Unfortunately, if you ask for context, you got to wait that time again. So it's also an important reason to be clear on what you're asking. But having a really good CMDB that has all your assets, all those relationships, how it ties throughout your business, should be your answer to your universe, your IT life, and everything in it, right? So where should I be spending my money? Where should I be closing up gaps? Device 42 should be able to answer that for you.
I love that. Man, it's been a fantastic conversation. I appreciate you guys coming on and hanging out with me.
Oh, thanks for having us. I really appreciate it.
We appreciate it. It's been fun.
All right. That's been another episode of the Smart IT Podcast. Until next time, take care. Thanks for joining another episode of the Smart IT Podcast, where we explore what's next for IT and disrupt the status quo, simplify the complex, and reduce risk together. If you like what you hear, please like, subscribe, and leave your comments. And for more Smart IT wisdom, check out my website at williamreed.info.